Hi everyone, this is Anna Finch from Finch Press Publishing. Now today's video is a book review of how to craft a great story, how to master plot, structure and form in your creative writing by Chris Sykes. Now Chris Sykes is both a teacher and an author from the US. He has had 3 stage plays produced and performed. He was a writer for radio, sports commentator. He has over 30 years experience in writing, publishing and education. He's also taught creative writing as a degree. Now, in this book, he covers the basics of story writing, so plot, conflict, how to structure a story, plot holes, how to fix them as well, plot drivers, mythic structure, screenwriting structure, poetry structure for sonnets. Um, Now, I actually picked this up at my local bookstore while I was looking for my reward book because I met my word goal for the day. I ended up buying 4 other books instead of just the one I went for. Now, throughout this book, there are actually writing exercises that focus on the specific idea for the chapter. So, in the first chapter, which is what is a story, they explain the different parts of a story, and there's a few writing exercises in here. See if I can find them. So there's a few writing exercises in here that are really good, um, and they'll be good for honestly, because I taught creative writing last year because I taught English. This would have been a helpful would have been helpful because it's written in a way that's easy to understand, and the little activities that are here um, could be good for getting students to play around with creative writing. So in here, there's um, a little activity um, for an extremely short story called, which is literally 6 words long. It's believed to have been written by Ernest Hemingway. Um, Now, the story, he asks you to look at those 6 words and actually question whether you think it's a story, what makes it a story, what story does it suggest to you, are there any characters, who are they, what do you think the story's about, and you write down those ideas. So you analyze this little mini story that's 6 words long. So it can be done within a few minutes. It would be a great warm-up activity for creative writing. So literally the story: for sale, baby shoes never worn. And you question whether it's a story. It's 6 words long. Now, there's no right or wrong approach in this. It outlines it. You look at things like word length. You look at the emotions. You look at what potential things could branch off from that particular short story. It's a pretty good activity, and there are other activities like this, where you mix and match sentences to create a short story with a beginning, middle, and end. You mess around with story structure in some of these activities. It's really good. Now, he also goes through things like how to plot, even if you're not a plotter or an outliner, so even if you're a pantser, he can apply for it. So it goes over how to actually create your plot. So even if you don't outline, you can keep that idea in your mind as you're writing it. So like starting at the end and working your way backwards, having some key ideas about what's going to happen in the story. And he also goes over keeping it flexible. This is just so you have a rough idea of how things could pan out, but keeping it flexible so you can adjust and adapt as the characters develop and change, which is pretty good. Um, he also goes over how plot. He also defines plot as a verb. So plot is a verb, plots are active, they grow and develop. The growth and development constitute key steps in the onward drive of the story. So that is a pretty good definition of plot. So that is pretty good. He goes over how you start with an ordinary character in an ordinary situation and you go on from there. So you put obstacles in their way in order to challenge them, to push them. It's pretty good. There was one story structure mentioned in here that I hadn't heard of before. So the plot ladder, which is a method of structuring a story, start at the bottom of the ladder. So you start with an initial situation and it builds up with each action, like steps on a ladder, you slowly go up. This is to build movement and pace. You can start with a character or their attributes. You can start with an emotion and slowly step through the emotions they could be feeling before thinking about the events that may make them feel that way, which is pretty good. I thought the way they explained sonnets in here was interesting and easy to understand and follow. Now I've taught English, and Shakespeare's plays and that come up very often in the English curriculum. So this is pretty good, especially if you had to study or teach something like Romeo and Juliet. The notes he has about sonnets in this would be very helpful in breaking down the sonnets at the beginning and at the end of the play. He goes over other methods and shows examples of how like a plot should slowly build up with. So you start with exposition, so build up slowly, and you have complication after complication until you get to the highest point, so your climax. And this is where things turn or twist and the problem's resolved and you eventually slowly build down and wind down. He also does this by breaking down the story of Cinderella to see how, so you can see how a story can progress. He also uses examples for that from like to do like the 3-act story structure, and he uses the movie Witness in order to show how it can fit. Like I don't know how many people have seen the movie Witness. I had to watch it and study it for, I think it was year 11. You start with a young Amish boy who witnesses a murder. The police officer takes him to the police station and tries to get him to spot the killer through images and photos. Detective gets frustrated, answers a phone call. The kid walks away and starts pointing at a photo. He walks away, sees trophies, because he's drawn by the trophies, because he's curious, and then points. And he's pointing at a photo. Police officer comes to the boy, looks at it, and sees him pointing, and he realizes what he's pointing at. And he realizes that the biggest problem is not finding the killer, it's protecting this boy from the killer, because the killer is a police officer and one of the most popular. And that is probably that's how he shows how starting with a plot point in the beginning. So you start with a problem that seems sort of obvious, and then you turn it on its head to keep people interested, because the problem's no longer what you originally thought, like in the case with Witness. Boy witnesses a murder, you got to work out who did it, right? But you take that concept and you twist it. And now the problem is not finding the killer, it's keeping this kid away from the killer, which makes it more interesting. I liked Witness. I found it interesting. I liked the movie. So the way he's used this in order to break down the 3-act story structure is pretty good. Yeah, so overall, I actually really enjoyed this. It was informative, easy to understand. The language was accessible, so young readers could pick this up and understand it. And for words and things that are a bit more complicated, he actually has a glossary of terms that he's used, like causal method, climax, exposition, falling action. So there's actually definitions in a glossary at the back. He's also used popular films like Finding Nemo in this. So this is really well written, really well written, easy to understand, quick read. I actually finished this in like an hour, 2 hours, so fairly quick. And I think this is a good tool for teachers. If they were teaching creative writing in English, it's a requirement for the Australian curriculum in English. But if they're teaching creative writing, I think this is a very good tool. It's got examples, activities you can use at the classroom that can be used for people at any level. So typically in a classroom, you'll have kids at, say for example, you're teaching a year 9 or year 10, say year 10 class. These are kids who are about 16. You'll have kids who are reading and writing at a year 10 level, so at level, the same level a 16-year-old is supposed to be. Yeah, we'll have a couple of kids who are writing at a higher level. But you also have a number of kids writing below. You may have kids who are writing at year 7, so beginning of secondary. You may have kids at the primary level or middle grade level, and their reading and writing is fairly low. But these activities can be used for those kids, whether the reading and writing skills or literacy skills of a kid is low or high. These activities can be used, and they can be used effectively. Now, I would find this more helpful as a teacher than as an author. If you had never written a story before, or had no idea how to structure it, and you just wanted to get some ideas on how to structure it, this can be good. But personally, I find this more helpful as a teacher reference or a teacher text for creative writing, not as something for an author. But it's still a good read. It's still interesting. At some points I struggled to read through it simply because of the way it's been formatted and laid out. I found How to Be a Writer by John Birmingham more interesting. I was more engaged in that text than this one, but this is still a good read. It's a bit dry at times, but still good. I find this pretty good, and it's interesting at times. The activities are good, and they can be used well in a classroom. So as a personal text for enjoyment, probably 4 out of 5. As a teacher text, so a teacher reference for creative writing, I would actually give it 5 out of 5 stars. It was really good. It is much more effective as a teacher tool than as a tool for an author. Anyway, that's it from me. If you like this video, press the like button down below. If you want to be notified of when I upload, hit the subscribe button. See you next time.